Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mu'min and Mu'minat, Salamun Alaikum. And thank you for tuning into the virtual broadcast of Astaana-e-Zehra's weekly Majlis program. On this Saturday, the 1st of Safar and the 19th day of September 2020. This evening, we're observing the Shahadat of Bibi Sakina, Salamullahi alayha, and we'll begin the Majlis with the recitation of Hadith-e-Kitab by Mahdi Razawi, followed by Salam by Naqib Abdi, and So Salam and Marthia by Naqib Naqwi. And now, Mahdi Razawi.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم عن جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري عن فاطمة الزهراء عليه السلام بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله قال سمعت فاطمة أنها قالت دخل علي برسول الله في بعض الأيام فقال السلام عليك يا فاطمة فقلت عليك السلام قال إني أجد في بدني ضعفا فقلت له أريدك بالله يا فتاه من الضعف فقال يا فاطمة ائتيني بالكساء اليماني فغطيني به فأتيته بالكساء اليماني فغطيته به وصرت أنظر إليه وإذا وجهه يتلألأ كأنه البدر في ليلة تمامه وكماله اللهم صل على محمد فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسن قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أماه فقلت وعليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله فقلت نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء فأقبل حسن نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه يا رسول الله أتأتني أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب هودي قد أذنت لك فدخل معه تحت الكساء
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولدي الحسين قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أماه فقلت وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي فقال لي يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه السلام عليك يا من اختاره الله تتنى أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي قد أذنت لك فدخلا معهما تحت الكساء
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبو الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عمي رسول الله فقلت نعم ها هو ما ولديك تحت الكساء فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله أتأتني أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال له وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا وسيي وخليفتي وصاحب لوائي قد أذنت لك فدخل علي تحت الكساء
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
ثم أتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله أتأتني أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بدتي قد أذنت لك فدخلت تحت الكساء
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ بي رسول الله بطرفي الكساء وأومى بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم أنا هرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن أعداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم إنهم مني وأنا منهم أجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
وقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان السماوات إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال أمين جبرائيل يا رب ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
فقال جبرائيل يا رب أتأتاني أن أحبط إلى الأرض لأكون معهم سادسا؟ فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك. فهبط أمين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله. العلي لا يكرهك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت سماء مبنية ولا أرضا مدهية ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضيا ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لأجلكم ومحبتكم وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام أمين وحي الله إنه نعم قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى عليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس إلى بيتي ويطهركم تطهيرا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
فقال علي عليه السلام لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ماذا جلوسنا حتى تحت الكساء من الفضل إن الله. فقال النبي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيوتنا ومحبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي عليه السلام إذن والله فزنا وفاز شيوتنا ورب الكعبة. فقال النبي ثانيا يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيوتنا ومحبينا وفيهم محموم إلا وفرج الله همه ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غمه ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقد الله حاجته. فقال علي إذن والله فزنا وسودنا وكذلك شيتنا فازوا والسود في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
बानो ये आबिद को बतला रही है मेरी सकीना को नींद आ रही है मेरी सकीना को नींद आ रही है कह दो हवाओं से आहिस्ताएं कह दो परिंदों से गुलना मचाए कह दो अंधेरों से वापस न आए कह दो अंधेरों से वापस न आए जागी हुई चैन कुछ पा रही है मेरी सकीना को नींद आ रही है जिंदा कदर जोर से अब न खोलो ए पहरेदार अब आहिस्ता बोलो तुम भी तो जागे हो कुछ देर सो लो تم بھی تو جاگے ہو کچھ دیر سو لو، بابا کی خوشبو اسے آ رہی ہے، میری سکینہ کو نیند آ رہی ہے۔ شاید رسن کی اذیت ہوئی کام، مدھم کرو بیبیوں شور ماتم، سجاد زنجیر بولے نہ اس دام، سجاد زنجیر بولے نہ اس دم، شاید غموں کی گھڑی جا رہی ہے، میری سکینہ کو نیند آ رہی ہے۔ یہ شام غریبہ کی جاگی ہوئی ہے، تماچوں کے در سے نہیں سو سکی ہے، ذرا اب گلے کی رسن جو کھلی ہے، ذرا اب گلے سے رسن جو کھلی ہے، سکون سے جو اب سانس لے پا رہی ہے، میری سکینہ کو نیند آ رہی ہے۔ میں خوش ہوں کہ سوئے گی میری دلاری، میں قربان اس کے میں اب اس پہ واری، بہت سہ چکی دکھ یہ غازی کی پیاری، بہت سہ چکی دکھ یہ غازی کی پیاری، مگر نفس کچھ اور بتلا رہی ہے، میری سکینہ کو نیند آ رہی ہے، میری سکینہ کو نیند آ رہی ہے۔
محمد و آل محمد بآواز بلند نعرہ صلوات۔
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔
جناب افتخار عارف صاحب کے چند شعر حاضر کر رہا ہوں، بلندتر صلوات۔
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔
شرف کے شہر میں ہر بام و در حسین کا ہے، شرف کے شہر میں ہر بام و در حسین کا ہے، زمانے بھر کے گھرانوں میں گھر حسین کا ہے، زمین کھا گئی کیا کیا بلند بالا درا، بھرا ہے جو اب بھی شجر حسین کا ہے، ہرا بھرا ہے جو اب بھی شجر حسین کا ہے، سوال بیعت شمس کار بہت ہے مگر حسین کا ہے گناہگار بہت ہے مگر حسین کا ہے شرف کے شہر میں ہر
جزاک اللہ جزاک اللہ. درود بھیجنے پر محمد وآل محمد.
اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد.
وعجل فرجهم.
شہزادی سکینہ سلام اللہ علیہا کی شہادت کے مرثیے کے چند بند ہیں. فاتحہ. جب گل ہوا چراغ حرم قید شام میں، یعنی سکینہ مر گئی یاد امام میں. دیکھے ستم یزید کے دربار عام میں، شیخ کے سلام کو گئی دارالسلام، شیخ کے سلام کو گئی دارالسلام میں. دنیا میں داد رس نہ ملا داد خواہ کو جا کر نشاں تماچوں کے دکھلائے شاہ، جا کر نشاں تماچوں کے دکھلائے شاہ کو. پھول پڑ گیا حسین کی عاشق نے کی خزا، بانوں نے نبض دیکھی تو پایا نہ دم ذرا. چلائی صدقے جاؤں مجھے دے گئی دغا، اپنی کہیں نہ میری سنی ہائے کیا، کہیں نہ میری سنی ہائے کیا کیا. تو کچھ پیام بھی میں نے دیا نہیں، تم چل بسی اور اماں نے رخصت کیا، چل بسی اور اماں نے رخصت کیا نہیں. بابا کی پیاری اماں کی پیاری زباں کو کھول، لائی ہوں شربت ہے میری پیاسی دہاں کو کھول. مارو رہی ہے دیدے گوہر فشاں کو کھول. مہماں بندے گلے سے نہ جاری، مہماں بندے گلے سے نہ جاری ماں کو کھول. دادی کھڑیں گی بیبی کی زلفیں، سوال لوٹو یہ پھٹا ہوا کرتا، لوٹو یہ پھٹا ہوا لوٹو یہ پھٹا ہوا کرتا اتار. اصغر کی بھولی باتیں سناؤ نثار ماں، اکبر کا ذکر کر کے رلاؤ نثار ماں. سیلی کا نیل ماں کو دکھاؤ نثار ماں. بابا کو جا کے در پہ بلاؤ نثار، بابا کو جا کے در پہ بلاؤ نثار ماں. تم کے غلغلے ہیں نہ رونے کا جوش ہے، بیوی جو خاموش ہے تو سب خاموش، بیوی جو خاموش ہے تو سب خاموش ہے. اٹھا اپنے کا وقت ہے پچھلا پہر ہوا، اونٹ سادے میرا کرتے سے منہ کو ڈھانپ کے پہلو میں بیٹھ جا اماں کی بیٹی اماں کو آواز دے اماں کی بیٹی اماں کو آواز دے سنا تب ذرا یہ گھر تھا تیرے بین کرنے سے زندان سونا ہو گیا بی بی کے من زندان سونا ہو گیا بی بی کے مرنے سے اس کے پاس رہتی شہ کربلا نہیں بی کے ناز اٹھانے کے خاطر چچا نہیں نادار ماں ہے پانی نہیں اور غذا نہیں پر اب کفن کے بعد سے مطلق رضا پر اب کفن کے بعد سے مطلق رضا نہیں اماں کے پاس رہنے سے ایزا اٹھا چکی بی بی تماچے کھا چکی گردن بندھا بی بی تماچے کھا چکی گردن بندھا چکی تو نے جو شام سے میرے زانوں پہ سر دھرا میں سمجھی تھی کہ کانوں کا کچھ درد کام ہوا آئی ہے آج سونے کو خود میری محل خواہ درد لا دوا کی خبر تھی نمو درد لا دوا کی خبر تھی بات گود کی تھی میری خالی کرنے کو سوئی تھی آج باز میرے بی بی ماں سوئی تھی آج باز میرے بی بی مرنے کو اکبر جدا نہ ہوتے تھے بابا سے ایک دم اصغر سے اور تم سے بہلتا تھا میرا غم اب نا امید ہو گئے دونوں طرف سے ہم دکھیارے میرے دکھ کے صدا کھائیں گے دکھیارے میرے دکھ کے صدا کھائیں گے تقدیر کیسی پھر گئی مجھ خواہ تہار کی وہ 6 مہینے کے گئے تم 4 سال وہ 6 مہینے کے گئے تم 4 سال کے بانوں کے بین سن کے حرم روئے بے شمار سن کر یہ غل پکارا یزید جفا شیار بھجوایا شے کا سر بھی اور ان کو نہیں قرار آئی خبر کے باپ پہ بیٹی ہوئی آئی خبر کے باپ پہ بیٹی آئی خبر کے باپ پہ بیٹی ہوئی ایسی کسی کی موت نہ ہوگی زمانے میں سیدانی بے کفن ہے بڑی خیر خواہ سیدانی بے کفن ہے بڑی خیر سیدانی بے کفن ہے بڑی خیر خواہ جزاک اللہ اللہم صلی اللہ
Jazak Allah, Mahdi Razwi for the recitation of Hadith Kisa, Nakhi for the recitation of the Salam, and Nakhi Nakhwi for the recitation of Soul Salam and Marsiya. Mu'min and Mu'minat, this is the third Majlis of this week's series and is dedicated to the Shahadat of Bibi Sakina Salamullahi Alayha, sponsored by the family of Agha Mashallah Razwi. We are very thankful and grateful for their generosity. May Allah shower His blessings upon the family in this life and the life hereafter. Tomorrow, starting at 8 p.m., will be the last Majlis of this week's series, sponsored by the Jaffrey family. So please join us tomorrow at 8 p.m. And without any undue delay, I would like to now invite from London, UK, Moulana Sayyid Ali Abbas Razawi Sahab to address the Shahadat Majlis. Moulana Sahab.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبو القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أما بعد. Our series of discussions have gone into its third night. Yesterday, we were looking at two very important things. The two types of people who are moving towards Allah. And ultimately, when everything is said and done, you come to the realization that there's nothing that gives a person peace, happiness, but in the pursuit of the divine. With all of the money in the world, and with all of the pleasures, human beings still get to a stage whereby they're unhappy, they're discontent. And we've seen that time and time again within our lifetime. The 21st century is probably the most advanced century in human existence in relation to comfort. Perhaps it's not really the most advanced in terms of knowledge. Yes, we're built on the knowledge of others, but the fact that our entire society still rests on the Romans tells you that within 2,000 years, hikmah hasn't evolved. Technology may have, wisdom hasn't. And perhaps for those people who are living in the States, you may not see it, but for us living in Europe, we still see it. From our roads that we drive on, all the way down to our structures and institutions, are still very much based on the Romans, on the conquest of the Romans. And so the very same thing with you. In fact, when an outsider like myself comes over, all I can see is relics of the English and of the Europeans. We as societies build upon the works of others. Our foundations have been laid. Today, if you go to the subcontinent, the entire mind frame of the subcontinent is still colonial in many ways. Still to this very day, the institutions, the systems, the perception, it's hugely different from those countries who weren't colonialized. If you look at the entire region, there's one country that wasn't, Iran, for example. If you look at the self-determination over the last 100 or so years of the Iranians, and you compare that to those countries that have been colonialized, the entire mind frame has been such. It's only next year that Barbados is going to become a republic, and the Queen's not going to be the head of state anymore. Now look, I'm not here to discuss history or political decisions. But the fact of the matter is this, it takes time for redundant attitudes to change, for mind frames to reset. It's not my place here to judge one way or the other. But the 21st century is such that we are living on a legacy, and every single country is. There's no one country safe from that. We're living on a legacy which is broken. And this is why you find more people who are broken today. Look, with globalization, with a culture, a global culture almost now. You go from one end of the earth to the other. Okay, you have your regional cultures, but there's a global culture now, thanks to YouTube, thanks to the internet, thanks to the speed of communication. Where once was different cultures, today you find that all of a sudden it's come into one. Despite all of that, people are still suffering. Despite the fact that you can switch off and go and watch, I don't know, what other things in this day, Netflix, for example. All of these comforts there for you to forget, to numb your pain. And still you find more people are depressed, more people are hurting, more people are going through depression, more people have both spiritual illnesses, psychological illnesses. And then if you look at this generation from 15 to 25, and you doctors will know better than I do, because you tell me time and time again, that particular generation is going through the worst of crisis, of identity crisis, from identity to loneliness and to all sorts of things. But if you go back a couple of generations, in fact, you don't need to go back a couple, go back to your parents' generation. The comforts weren't there, very limited utilities that they may have, but there was still a level of peace there. Families were still together. Families were still growing together. Happiness, though without material wealth. And for those people who, for example, when I speak to some of the elders in our communities who were there for partition, for example, between India and Pakistan, those who migrated over to Pakistan, regardless of the brutalities of partition and independence that took place, you find that their elders, these elders were still happy. And so a migration again takes place. So those people from the subcontinent came to the UK. And I'm giving you the dynamics of the UK. The vast majority of people in the UK, the vast majority of migrants, you could say, going back maybe 20 years ago or so, were really from the subcontinent, and from them were from the Punjab in the UK. And in the American, with you guys, there's a different dynamics. But I can only speak for the United Kingdom at this stage. And the reason why I say all of this is that that generation who saw partition, or that generation who saw difficulty, worked hard, made a lot of money, look at where their children are as a community today, with all of that wealth and everything that was developed. Today, this generation who's born and bred in the United Kingdom, you look where they are today. And I'm generalizing here because it's a general problem. And then from then onwards, you look at a city like London, 49% of people are foreigners, meaning what? Literally, passports aren't British in that respect. Why? Transmigration from the EU countries. People coming in from various parts of Asia. Huge investments taking place. Regardless of all of that, the most liquidity in the world, still in the city of London, regardless of Brexit. But still look, people are not at peace. People are still suffering. You've seen yourself within your pop culture, certain individuals shaving their heads off, regardless of all the fame and the money, having breakdowns. Why is that? Because the material body is not sufficient until the soul itself is comforted. And how does a soul comfort itself? The minute that you believe in a soul, an immaterial reality, straight away you come to comprehend that there's an absolute being. That absolute being, you could call it whatever you want to call it. You don't need to call it God, but there's an absolute being. And when you come to comprehend that absolute being, then you come to comprehend the fact that from that absolute being, all of us are created, or to use the term in the Bible, in the image of God. Bearing all of that in mind, when a person wakes up and realizes that through all of this material wealth, truly doesn't give us happiness. Look, the first thing that comes into mind, if you look at the story of Buddha, he was a prince. Imagine giving everything up, all the material wealth, all of the happiness and satisfaction. And he gave it up. Why? To truly go for peace. Same example as there. Look at it from an outsider's perspective. Let's forget for a minute that it's in our scriptures or in the Abrahamic scriptures. Look at Moses. What was Moses? Essentially, he was the son of the Pharaoh. Okay, Pharaoh adopted him. But had Moses stayed in line, let's say, with the ideals of the Pharaoh, what would have happened? He would have inherited, or he would be part of an inheritance of an entire kingdom. He left all of that. Takes a life of poverty, but through that poverty finds peace. not just for himself, but for his people as well. The same thing, what else do you see? Ibrahim takes Hajar and Ismail. Look at it and see. Takes his family into a desert, into the middle of nowhere. You know, I remember speaking to an alim, very big mujtahid. And I said, look, you know, the one thing that brings our faiths together is Abraham. And he looked up at me and he said, really? And today, when we do interfaith, the person to bring forward is Abraham. Jews, Christians, Muslim, all of us seem to take Abraham as the patriarch, as the example. And he looked at me and he said, look at it from an outsider's perspective. A person who abandons his family, marries more than one time, attempted murder on his son. He said, what are you thinking about? What are you looking at? And at that moment, I realized that regardless of everything that was, look at the perception that human beings have as our patriarch, who we're very proud of. And we'll say, look, it was God who decreed. And at that moment, it was God who decreed. Now, you do that in the modern day age, and you'll see people will raise fingers up at you. But in those days, remember, God decreed. And he was willing to leave all of this. The purpose of it, put his family through hardship. Why did he put his family through hardship for? Really behind that, it was God. There was a peace there. So what did Allah do? He's told to abandon, of course he didn't abandon his family, but from the outside world he abandoned his family. So what did Allah do? And the Bible talks about this. He made Ismail into a great nation. A great nation. 12 tribes essentially came from Ismail as well, or 12 sons. And from that 12 tribes in the same way, and later on they came together in the form of Quraysh. And in the same way with Ishaq, and again, you found from Ya'qub another 12 tribes that come along, 12 sons. And from those 12 sons, you find the entire silsila of Bani Israel. So look, imagine and see. The entire religions are coming from Abraham, so to speak. Before Abraham, there may have been other faiths. But after Abraham, what do you find? You find that Judaism and Christianity specifically and only for the Bani Israel. It was only later on that Christianity became evangelical. Christianity was never for the whole world. It was only specifically for the Bani Israel. Isa was what? Alayhi salam. Nabi Isa was the Masih, was the Messiah. If you look at the philosophy behind that, what was it meant to be? For who? A Messiah figure, emancipation for the Jewish nation. In the same way you found Musa was the same thing. Judaism is not for all of creation, but it was for a particular people. It was the religion of a person or a people. In the same way, Ismail also had a religion, and that was monotheism. What was it? Hanif. If you look today to the Quran, what does the Quran say? When it looks towards Ibrahim, it says, Kana Hanifan Musliman. The question is this, but Islam came after the Prophet. So Ibrahim is a Muslim, and Jesus is a Muslim, and Musa is a Muslim, and Yaqub is a Muslim. And the Quran points towards multiple prophets as being Muslim. What does that mean? No, actually, Islam is monotheism in its absolute sense. If you look to the Quran, Allah doesn't mention adiyan, He doesn't mention religions. He says there's only one religion, Inna din and Allah al-Islam. For Allah, the religion of Islam. There is no other religion but one. In the language of the Quran, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are not different religions, they're different shariats. Why? In the Quran, there's 5 shariats which I mentioned. Shariat of Nuh, Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, and the Prophet. Those are the shariats that I mentioned. But when you look at deen or religion, there's no adiyan, there's only deen. So you could have been a Hanif, and it was okay that somebody was a Jew or Christian. And again, the religions in those days weren't exclusive. It wasn't an exclusive thing. It wasn't the fact that you couldn't be more than one. In fact, pluralism was there until the point, for us anyway, it becomes exclusive because Islam of the Prophet is for all of humanity. That's where the difference comes in. Where you find that the Hanifs of Judaism or Christianity was for specific nations, and so therefore there's a pluralism and diversity. When Islam came along, it was for Mahiman al-Alayh. It was for all, it was a Mahiman, it was for all of humanity, and it was above in that respect. a development. And this is why, if you look at the traditions, it says that to be a Muslim is to follow Ibrahim and Musa and Isa. So there's a tasalsul that takes place. We've got to follow the prophets of before. Because what essentially we're saying is that there was never a cut in hidayah. The Prophet just didn't come out of nowhere and just give all of those things. 90% of our Sharia is the same as the Mosaic Sharia. You eat halal, they eat kosher. You pray 3 times a day. If you look at it and see, they pray 3 times a day. You have circumcision, male circumcision, they have male circumcision. Why? Because they were both brothers, and from the brothers came 2 faiths. Sood is haram for you, it's haram for them. Interest is haram between Jews, and interest is haram as well between Muslims or those people who have an agreement with you. And I'm not going to go into the technical detail. I leave it for your maraja and for you to do istiftah. But of course, as you know, interest is jaiz to take from kafir harbi. Now, what the definition of that is, it's not for me to go into. I'll leave it to your books to see and to do istiftah to your marja. But the fact is roughly the same, technically the same rulings on the interest within Judaism and Islam. And we can go deeper and deeper and deeper and see the concept of abolition and so forth. And many of the time we find within our own Sharia, we call it Sunnat Ibrahimi. So there's a Sunnat of Ibrahim there and the Sunnat of Musa there. If you look at all taxation within Judaism, it comes up to 20%, 10%, 10%. Let's say 20, all in all 10, 20%. What do you do? What do you give, which is 20%? There's many overlaps. Why is that? Because that's also a religion, a divine religion. But there are things that change. It's not the fact that we're not the same. We're not the same. Things do change. And the wilaya and the concentration of wilaya is much stronger. Why? Because mambeya wilaya, actually the entire fabrics, the roots of wilaya, is with the Prophet, is with our Prophet. Why? He was a prophet from the very beginning of creation. And his nur is the nur that encompasses everything. All of these prophets that you get, from Adam to Khatam, are reflections of the divine nature of our Prophet. Our Prophet is the absolute encompassing of the Asma and Sifat of Allah. And 124,000 prophets, if they were all to come together in one body, that one body is known as Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you see, when a person came to the Prophet and he asked that Allah has 2 types of names, all of his 99 names, or for example, 1,001 names, or more than that, 3,000 names, let's say all the names that have come in our dua. If all of those names were to be brought together, right, they're divided into 2 camps, Jalal and Jamal. So there's a tradition that says that Moses was Jalal, Isa was Jamal. There were 2 sides of a coin. But the Prophet says, I have both of these eyes, both of these realities are found within me. So the Prophet in and of itself is the completion. And the completion is important. And where does the completion take place? Completion takes place here. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأَتَمِّمْ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. The purpose of the Prophet coming was to perfect the makarim al-akhlaq. And the makarim al-akhlaq is far beyond and above what we can imagine. Look, there's 2 things. So fadail of akhlaq, which means what? It's what Musa was preaching, right? If you look at some of the traditions, it's an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, for example. The whole concept of justice. This comes under the fadail of akhlaq. Let's say, for example, somebody steals something from you. You have all the right to take him to court, right? And that's part of the fadail of akhlaq. And this is what Musa, for example, in past teaches. But if you develop the argument forward, if a person steals from you and you forgive them, and you come from a position of mercy, and that mercy even outtakes, in many ways, the ability to take retribution, that is makaram al-akhlaq. That is the absolute level of akhlaq. To give you an example, I mentioned yesterday the idea of manazil al-sa'irin, the stages, the manazil, the maqamat of the arifin. To get then, we said there are 2 types of mystics. One is salik and the other one is jazbi, who goes from 0 to 100. But if you look at the Salik, you go through different stages. When you get to stage maybe 29 or so, there's a term which is known as Fatuwa. What is Fatuwa? Fatuwa is chivalry. What is chivalry? La fatah illa Ali, la sayf illa dhul fikar. Right? This la fatah, fat, here goes back to Fatuwa. There's no other person who is chivalrous but Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now, what does this chivalry mean? The chivalry is a maqam itself. And part of the chivalrous nature, and again, there are 3 stages to it: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. If you want to become basically like Amir al-Mu'mineen, which is really the aim of all of the mystics, to come as close to the Imam as possible, because Imam is sahib al-walaya. Walaya comes from him. And walaya is that entity that the whole world is created on. The batin of the universe rests on wilaya. And that wilaya is the embodiment of that wilaya is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is what Amir al-Mu'mineen is in Sanikana, the perfect man. And as you all know, that the greatest name of God is that name that controls all of the universe. You know, we have a tradition that says that there's 73 letters. 72 of those letters Ali Muhammad have. Asif, in the time of Sulaiman says, who can bring the throne of Bilqis? So Asif says, I can bring it faster than you can even blink. And the story is in front of you. I want to take the summary of the story. A throne comes, right? And the throne was so big that they say 40 people could have sat on one side and 40 on the other side. There's a huge throne. So in fact, it's as if the whole throne room was bought. Hadith says Asif had 1 letter of Isma Azam. That 1 letter was so powerful that it gave him the ability to bring the throne of Bilqis. Why? Because he had a form of wilaya, a form of wilaya taqweeni. He was able to bring from alam at-taqween. And then you had Jesus, and he had a number of these letters. And more than all of them, Ibrahim had, and Adam had 28, let's say. Ali Muhammad had 72. What are these letters? These letters are not just letters. If I give you a letter, it's not just like that. These letters are actualization, the seeds. When it goes into the heart and you give it the right water, it begins to grow. If I give you a seed, that seed means nothing to you. Potentially it's an apple tree, let's say. For you to make it into an apple tree requires certain conditions. Requires the right vessel to be able to do that. So in the same way, Isma Adam is not just a letter. Isma Adam is a state of being. And when that state of being is there, then you become Sahib-e-Walaya. Amir al-Mu'mineen, therefore, in and of itself, is wujud, is Isma Adam. The greatest name of God is the wujud of the Imam itself. And that's why the wilaya of the Imam is important. To understand the wilaya of the Imam is important. What separates us from all the other Muslims is the fact that we have wilaya. And if you've not understood this, then we just Shia by lip service only. Now, what do I say all of this for? Remember I mentioned Fatuwa. The highest level of Fatuwa is this. When you start, the highest level of Fatuwa is relation to God, but let's go down a step to the intermediary step. So the highest level of Fatuwa in terms of humanity or creation is this. That you even begin to respect and love those people who are your enemies, who have repulsed you away, pushed you away. It's not just the fact of having tahammul over them. It's not just the fact of, for example, tolerating them. It's above and beyond toleration. And that maqam itself is very difficult, especially with someone who's wronged you. But the idea is that you let go of all of negativity in your heart that you have for somebody else. And in fact, you just don't let go. You actively work to help those people who have wronged you. Now look, the discussion on Fatuwa is a long one. If we have time tomorrow, I'll go into it and break down the different stages. But a person who has reached that maqam, their heart is such that it becomes forgiving. The heart is such that becomes caring, accepting, and that is what makaram al-akhlaq symbolizes. It symbolizes virtue. Virtue at the highest level. Virtue through compassion and love. That's how you start becoming godlike. So now let's take it, and we require stage by stage, right, on that, to become like that. What is a person who's jazbi? They reach the top straight away. They become like that straight away, compassionate. And they actualize all of the names of God in one go. Let's take it from there, though. We mentioned on the first night two things. Firstly, those people who worship Allah, but the second thing was when it comes to bala. And because each one of us face problems in our life, that's what we need to address. First thing is this: change your worldview, change your understanding of God. Remember, if a person has a positive impression of God, things then start to work in the right way. We need to start changing our opinions of God. We need to start changing our worldview. Let me give you an example. 8th Imam says, God deals with people according to the way that they perceive him. This is why it's important. Have husn al-dhan when it comes to Allah. Not su'a dhan when it comes to Allah. Why is that? When a person has su'a dhan, they begin to lose hope in the divine. I'll give you an example. The biggest example of a person who lost hope, shaitan. Had shaitan repented, he wouldn't be shaitan. Do you know why he became Iblis? Look at the evolution of shaitan. He starts off as Harith, a jinn. He becomes the Azazil, the Aziz of Allah. All of a sudden, his fall takes place, he becomes Iblis. Technically, Iblis means a person who loses hope in Allah. And when he loses hope in Allah, he becomes shaitan. First thing is this: never lose hope in your Creator. Second thing is this: make sure that you have your belief such that you have husn al-dhan with Allah. The more that you deal with God in a positive way, the more positive outlook you have. So what do we have bala for? Bala breaks us. Know something, when a person is broken and they pray, Allah accepts that prayer. I'll give you an example. Another example. A son does something, or a child does something. That's not a good action. And generally, if you do that in front of your parents, what do your parents do? Tell you off. But let's say by the time you come to your parents, you're broken, you're crying. You've understood the mistake that you've made. What would your mother do in that situation? At this point in time, she's not going to tell you off. You're already broken, you're crying. You're broken, so she'll come, she'll give you a hug. She knows, look, son, you've learned your lesson. It's going to be all right now, change. That's a mother. And look at your Creator. If you come arrogantly to your Creator, yes, bala may come down, reaction may come down. But if you sit down and you're broken, and you truly are, and you're humbled, and you're broken, and you say, Allah, look, I have no one other than you. Do you think Allah's going to punish you? Do you think Allah's going to bring down bala on you? And it's that moment when you're broken, that's when you call upon your Creator. You talk to your Creator, and you find comfort in the Creator. Therefore, there's a very beautiful Russian saying which says that the lowest you can fall is in the hand of God. In times of time, in times of tribulation, there's nothing lower than the hand of God. So let me take you to another story. Again, to emphasize this. Look, there was a Iranian king by the name of Nadir Shah, that most of you have heard of. Nadir Shah. Nadir Shah had a culture, you could say, or style, that whenever his army would march, and of course towards the end of his life he was very tyrannical, but when his army would march, he would always be half a mile or so in front of them. He felt he was brave, and he would lead from the front, so he'd be in front of them. They say that he was going for a conquest, and he happened to pass a village, and again he was in front of his army. So as he came into the village, he was riding his horse, and he saw a young boy had a book in his hand, and he was holding the book very tightly, and he was running quickly towards a particular location. So Nadir Shah asked him, he says, look, son, what have you got in your hand? He says, I've got the Quran in my hand. So Nadir Shah became happy. He So, okay, this guy's going to read Quran. So he asked him, he says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to my maktab, I'm going to my school to read Quran. So he asked him the question, he says, what are you reading? At this moment, he says, Surah Fath. So now the Shah gets even more happy. He thinks to himself, look, Surah of victory. And I'm going for a battle, so it must be a good omen. She says, son, hold on 1 minute. He takes out a gold coin and says, look, let me give you this gold coin. The child looked up at him and he says, I can't take this gold coin. He says, why? He says, because if I take your gold coin and when I take it home, my mother's going to be very upset with me. She's going to ask me, you're a child, where did you get this? So Nadir Shah smiles, he says, tell your mother, Nadir Shah gave it to you. So he turns around and he says, then my mother's going to get even more angry, upset. So Nadir Shah looks at him and he says, why? And he looks up and he says, because my mum will say you're lying. If it was Nadir Shah truly, he would have given you an entire case of gold coins. Nadir Shah smiled. He says, son, here's a case of gold. Why? Because Nadir Shah didn't want to lose or ruin his image in the mind of a child. He wanted to keep his image. He's a king, worldly king, wanting to keep his image because that child had husn al-dhan for Nadir Shah. Now imagine, your creator, your Lord. If you have husn al-dhan in front of Allah, do you think Allah's not going to keep your respect? Keep that husn al-dhan, that good thought that you have for him? Why do we always perceive God in a negative way? Start perceiving God in a positive way, and you see that life will change in front of you. That brings me to another story. Again, I remember the story when the Mongols, Genghis Khan, when he was invading. And as you know, he was brutal, barbaric and brutal. And he comes to the city of Hamdan, or Hamadan. When he comes to the city of Hamadan, he says to the people, look, I want you to answer a question. You know that I'm bloodthirsty, you know I fulfill what I say. I'm going to kill all of you if you don't answer it correctly. So they were like, okay, what's the problem? What's the story? He says, did God decree for me to kill you? Or is it because of my own actions that I'm about to kill you? And people thought, if we say it's God and he kills us, then there's no blame on him. And if we say it's him, and then he kills us, so what should we do? And as they were discussing, there was a farmer, and that farmer comes forward and he says, you know what, I'm willing to answer your question. So Genghis Khan says, okay, tell me the answer. He says, nor is it God, nor is it you. It's actually our own deeds. The fact that we lie, cheat, steal, hurt people, give respect to people who are not worthy of it, and disrespect people who are worthy of it. We undermine our scholars. We don't have respect for our elders. It's because of all of these things that Allah has sent you on us. And at that moment, that was the right answer. And it makes sense. And it resonated. But look, what am I trying to say? The first stages of peace, to gain that inner peace, is to start off with husn al-dhan. Have a good impression of God even in times of trial and tribulation. And you'll find that when problems do befall, Allah alleviates those problems from your life. Second thing is this though. Hold on to that wilayah of the Ahlul Bayt. And the most important thing that brings hope, because it's like a light. Remember, what we're looking for is the light. And because of our deeds, our heart covers that light. There's veils that cover that light. The most powerful thing to reignite yourself is the Azaf Sayyid al-Shuhada. Whatever you need to do, do for the sake of Imam Hussein. Look, Ayatollah Qadhi, said Ali Qadhi Tabatabai, right? Famous mystic, teacher of Ayatollah Bahjat and Co. Famous mystic. He used to have a majlis in his house on a Thursday night. Ayatollah Khoyi says that when I used to go there, I used to put my shoes under my armpits and I used to go. And the reason being was that Ali Qadhi said, Ali Qadhi Marhum used to take everybody's shoes. And you've seen in Karbala when you go for Arba'in, when you come in to Karbala or now even along the way, you have people who are cleaning people's shoes, wiping them, polishing them. So Ali Qadhi would do this. He would polish people's shoes, he would wipe their shoes, he would straighten their shoes. But there's a second thing he would do as well. And that is he would give chai to the people. Two things. And even when he was old, people would say, look, why are you doing this? He says, this is my service. This is my promise to Imam Hussein. The smallest of actions for the sake of Imam Hussein has a lot of value to it. The reason being is this. Imam alayhi salam holds no debt on his shoulders. And we've got to be servants of the Azhar in all sincerity. And that's, again, very important to remember. We must be sincere to the cause. It's not the fact that we become arrogant. Remember, Allah gives us a position, He can take that position away. What's important is to be humble, to remember that you are a khadim of Azhar Sayyid al-Shuhada. Be the first to serve people. These are from the signs of the awliya Allah, to serve the Azadar of Imam Hussein, generally to serve. You'll see that inner peace comes to you. And this is why they say, look, again, there's two more things that one can do. First, learn to share. Learn to share without wanting anything back unconditionally. Human beings are created like that. Look, they say Ibrahim never ate food. Never ate food without someone being there. Prophets wouldn't eat alone. As one of my teachers would say, it says animals eat alone, human beings don't. But the fact of the matter is this. The first stage is to share without wanting anything back. Whether it's your food, share it, eat with people. Whether it's wealth, property, whatever it may be. Learn to give. Because remember, there's certain characteristics that if a person has, they will never face hell. When I say person, I mean from 7 billion human beings, regardless of faith, culture, language, whatever it may be. One of them is generosity. Generosity. A person who's brave. A person who has good akhlaq. And that's three. Three things that I'm mentioning, and the rest will leave for now. But a person with generosity, with courage, with good akhlaq. These are those things that are valuable for a human being. Look, final thing I'm going to say. I'm just looking at the time, cognizant of the time. I know it's difficult to listen to somebody online without physically being there. I know it's difficult for us as well. Just to look at a screen, stare at a screen. And just seeing your own reflection. I was speaking to an alim today and he said, you know what, it's good that Azhar is online, but because the problem is that I'm not an expert on television. I can't look at a box the whole time. And you know, it resonates as well. It becomes very difficult sometimes not to be there physically. Because remember one thing, the purpose of Azhar is that we become one body. And we actually benefit from each other's nur. Because at the moment when you're in the Azhar of Imam, when you're in the Majlis of Imam Hussein, when you're doing Azhar, when you're crying, there's a nur that shines inside of you. And all the people around, you benefit from that nur. But inshallah, we've made the intention and we can spiritually connect, even if we are far away. So the final thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to add this together, and hopefully we'll carry it on tomorrow. Look, the 7 hukuk that a brother has on another brother. A person goes to the Imam, right? As he goes to the Imam, he says to the Imam, he says, look, Mawla, tell us about certain hukuk that bring us into your wilaya. And if a person doesn't fulfill this hukuk, they're outside of the wilaya, outside the wilaya of Allah. So Imam replies, he says, look, I actually don't want to tell you, because I'm scared that if I tell you, you don't do it, then you're outside of the wilaya. And this person insists and he insists and he insists. So Imam tells them 7 things. Now, whether I should say all of those 7 things, well, maybe not today. Let's build up slowly, otherwise we'll all be outside of the wilaya. But I'll give you one thing. And again, that one thing is important. In fact, no. I'll give you a couple of them. Let's see if we can implement them. We're taking a risk here. And this is why sometimes ignorance in these situations is bliss. But let me tell you, it's something which is known as the golden rule. What you want for yourself, want for somebody else. That's one of the 7. What does that mean? Now, I've said it, you've listened to it. It's very simple, easy to listen to. You've got to develop it forward. What does it mean, though? It means that if you don't like people backbiting about you, don't backbite about other people. It means if you don't like cheating other people, don't cheat. If you don't like other people cheating, you don't cheat other people. It means if you don't like somebody talking to you rudely, don't be rude to other people. It means if you don't like people being arrogant to you, don't be arrogant to other people. It means that if you don't like people belittling you, don't belittle other people. Regardless of how tall they are, short they are, old they are, young they are, whatever their size, weight, whatever it may be very vigilant. Don't even belittle a youth or a child. Sometimes we take for granted children, and sometimes children take the adults for granted. Respect is 2 ways. We're meant to respect our elders, but the elders are meant to have mercy for their children or youngsters. What does mercy mean? Seen a mother and a child? That's mercy. Elders are meant to be merciful, but the youngsters are meant to respect. So you see, that's 1. So we put 1 away. I'll mention 3 more actually. I wasn't going to mention them, but I'm going to mention these 3 and I'm going to finish. For today, inshallah, we'll continue the discussion on later tomorrow. These 3 things have got to do with this. When a person is sick, it is incumbent upon you to visit them. But not for half an hour or 1 hour. That every single joke that you have, you tell them. And they're dying anyway of the fact that the joke is bad or whatever it may be. Go for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. When the hadith talks about visiting people, it doesn't mean to become a burden on that person. It means to go very quickly, briefly, just to do dua. And remember one thing, you pray for that person, but the hadith says when a person's sick and they pray for you, dua becomes mustajab. So ask them to pray for you as well, firstly. Secondly, when a person passes away, it is incumbent upon you to go to their janazah. If you hear that somebody's died, of course, not within COVID restrictions or whatever it may be, but there may be a cap on people coming to the janazah, or at least it is in Europe, go to the janazah. And thirdly, whenever you remember them or whenever somebody talks about them, always be positive. Do not ever say anything negative, otherwise you've taken the haqq of that brother, even if he was your enemy. So there are 4 things now I've mentioned. Perhaps I'll mention a 5th thing, final thing. Because again, we may not get time to discuss in detail the rest tomorrow. 5th is this. Don't ever backbite your brother. Don't ever backbite. Don't ever talk negatively about your brother. Brother, sister, both in that respect. So look, we bring today's discussion to an end. Today I want to talk about the Shahadat of Bibi Sakina. The last 2 nights we've just touched on certain stories of Bibi Sakina. I wish we were together. We could have recited a long masaib. though you're with me on the other side of the screen, I'm actually alone. Because of the restrictions, we can't even have anyone. You know, generally in the 10 days of Muharram, we're able to congregate with 4, 5, 7, 10 people, depending on the restrictions, and at least we were able to record something. That hal is there. But you know, the tradition says, it says that Imam Rada alayhi salam said to one of his companions, he says, look, malaika descend. Perhaps I'm alone sitting here and there's no one here, but when the dhikr of Ali Muhammad come, I have certainty that there's malaika in this room that I'm in. Two things I'm going to make, and the same thing with you. Where you are, just make the niyyah. Most people are listening. Make a niyyah. Make a niyyah now. We're sitting in the Majlis of Imam Hussein. With the best of adab, put your phones away for those who have phones out. Focus. If you can sit on the floor, sit on the floor. If you can't, sit on a chair. With full adab, make the intention. Because know that you're inviting Ahlul Bayt. Today you're going to give condolences to 3 people. Sayyid al-Shuhada, Rabab, but more so Fatima-e-Zehra alayhi salam. And of course, condolences are there for Abul Fadl Abbas, Imam Sajjad. But the fact is this: the most pained is Zahra alayhi salam from everyone. Make the intention. No, on nights like these, dua becomes mustajab. You know, we have hope in Allah. This is why all of this lecture was there for this reason. We have hope. I know there are people who are suffering tonight. I know some of you are listening are suffering. Have hope. Have hope in Hussein. Remember one thing, Imam Hussein gave his life, he gave his neck, he gave his family. But he gave it for you so that you can have hope. The rahmah of the Shahadat of Imam Hussein is so powerful, it still touches us today. Have hope. Let me narrate to you one thing. Look, I'm going to recite slowly. That's all I can do. They say that on the 11th of Muharram, all the women were tied. And when they were tied, you ever look from Kufa to Sham? In the olden days when it was safe to travel, and I say the olden days, even a decade ago, 2 decades ago, what would you see along the way? The small graves. You know why the small graves are there? Nobody knew who children they were. So this is the son of Hussein, this is the daughter of Hussein. That's all that's written. Of course, Imam Hussein didn't have so many children, so people didn't know whose children they were. And on the 11th of Muharram, all of the women were chained. The children were holding on to their mothers. The children weren't chained. And the mothers, as their arms were tied behind their backs, they would pray that our children don't go to sleep. The minute a child would fall asleep, the child would fall and the hooves would go on that child and the mother would be watching. As painful as it was, let's say a time came. A time came where Imam Hussein's head fell and it wouldn't go any further. Eventually Shimr comes to Imam Sajjad and he says, why isn't it that your father's head's not moving forward? You can imagine a lonely Imam comes forward and says, Father, my back can't take it anymore. Why don't you go forward for? At that moment, a voice comes from a cut head. It says, son, my Sakina's fallen somewhere, and I'm not going to go forward until you don't find her. At that moment, your Imam Sajjad looks to her Sayyidah Zainab, says, Aunt, can you go and find Sakina? She's somewhere. She's somewhere. My father's head's not going to go forward until she's not found. They say Sayyidah Zainab begins to walk. There were trees there. It's like a forest. She begins to walk. There were trees there. From a distance, she sees that a woman dressed in black was holding a child. And that woman dressed in black with a niqab, she was holding the child and she was showing compassion to that child. Sayyidah Zainab goes forward and she can't take it anymore. She looks up at that woman and she says, "Oh woman, you know that this is the yatim of Hussein. Know that on the day of judgment, when my mother Fatima-e-Zehra comes, I'm going to intercede for you." At that moment, the woman looks up and she says, "Zainab, recognize me. I'm your mother." This is where this legacy begins. You know how many days have gone roughly? Roughly how many days have gone since the day of Ashura? Tell me roughly how many days have gone? 19 days? 20 days? How long did Sakina live? 19 days? 20 days after Karbala? It's not even Arba'in yet. Not even 40 days did she live. Imagine. Not even 40 days have gone by. What happened to this girl? Look, it's difficult for me to recite all of this. Tonight, the tabut of Bibi Sakina is going to be lifted. I'm going to just recite 2 things and that's it. Nor can my heart take it, nor can yours. From past experience, I've seen how the Mu'mineen of Astaana-e-Zehra react. You've been there, I've been there. You know people can't take it. Some people pass out. It's difficult to listen. Masaib of Bibi Sakina. 2 things I'm going to say and that's it. They say that when Bibi Sakina was given ghusl and kafan, those people have been to say the ruqyah. You've been to Sham. The ziyarat nama. On the back of the ziyarat nama, there's a very strange hadith. It says that when the women wanted to give ghusl and kafan to Sakina, Sayyidah Zainab comes out and she says, "Son, should we take off her shirt to give ghusl and kafan? Because every time they tried to take it off, her skin would come off." Imam Sajjad says, "No, leave it, because otherwise her body is so broken it's going to start bleeding." Then again they come running and they say, "Son, there's fungus growing on this girl's body." Imam Sajjad replies, says, "That's not fungus. That's when Shimmer would beat her. She would go green, and she would be blue, and she would be red." Finally, the women come one more time. They say, "How do we give her ghusl and kafan?" When we pour water over her hair begins to shred. Imam begins to cry. Why? Shimmer would grab her by the hair and pull her. That's when they were giving ghusl and kafan. But when Imam Sajjad raised the janaza, the dead body, this lifeless body, he's putting it into the grave. You can just imagine Amir al-Mu'mineen when he's putting the body of a Zaharain. The eye was bruised. The ears were bleeding. The hair was bleeding. The back was broken. A rib was shattered. That day that came, they say Sakina was sleeping, but nowhere in the Maqtal does it actually say, or the Maqatil, if we look at it, if we look at all the history books, it doesn't say Sakina ever slept properly. It says that she just used to close her eyes and she would think she was sleeping. She closed her eyes when that day came before she passed away. But when she closed her eyes, she opens her eyes and she says, "Aunt, I miss my father. I miss my first time after 20 days," she's saying this. What does Sayyidah Zainab reply? She says, "Daughter, you know that your father's not here." She says, "No, auntie. When I closed my eyes, I saw my father. He came to me. He said to me, 'Sakina, come to me.' My father held me in his arms. He hugged me. He removed the blood from my ears. He removed the tears from my eyes. He put his hand on my head. He says, 'Sakina, come to me.' What was the reply? It says that your father is truthful and you're truthful. But the next time you see your father, tell your father Zainab hasn't seen Hussein either for 20 days. Just imagine that moment. What happened? Sakina closes her eyes now this time. She begins to cry again. As she begins to cry, a Mal'oon is sleeping. That Mal'oon gets up. He says, "Who's crying?" One of his servants was in Taqiyya. He says, "Shimr." He says, "Yazid, who cries in Sham?" So 4-year-old girl's crying. Says, "What does she want?" Says, "She wants her father's head." She wants her father. Says, "Take the head, take it to her." They say with all of adab and respect, this man holds the head of Imam Hussein and he brings it to the prison. As he brings the head to the prison, a brother was standing there or a son was standing there. He looks up and his face turns color. He says, "Oh person, if you didn't know how to carry the head of my father, you should have told me. I would have carried it. Don't you know? When a hair would break on my father's head, his mother would cry for 3 days." Takes the head, takes it to Sakina, puts it on her chest. Sakina opens her eyes. She looks up. She says, "Father, look at Nasib. Yesterday, I was sleeping on your chest, Father. Today, you're sleeping on my chest." At that moment, she puts her small hands, remove the tears from the eyes of Sayyid al-Shuhada and the blood from his lips, puts her hand under the beard of Imam Hussein, says, "My gharib father, my madhloom father, O father who lost his eyesight when Ali Akbar was killed, why don't you open your eyes and tell me, Father? Look at me and see, have you ever seen a girl like this?" Says Sayyid al-Shuhada doesn't open his eyes. Again she says, "My gharib father, my madhloom father, why don't you open your eyes and tell me those earrings that you gave me for Eid day, Father, who took my earrings away?" Again, eyes don't open up. Again she says, "My gharib father, my lonely father, why don't you open your eyes and tell me, have you ever seen a 4-year-old girl whose hair's gone white like this? My father, tell me, have you ever seen a child who was slapped on the face like this? Look at the bruising on my face. Father, look at me and tell me, Father, have you ever seen a 4-year-old girl whose back is bent, Father? Father, tell me, open your eyes and tell me, have you ever seen a 4-year-old girl who's holding a bruise?" Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Matam Hussein.
Sakina, hi 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 Sakina. Sakina, hi Sakina, hi Sakina,
रोकर सकीना शाम के जिंदा में मर गए रोकर सकीना शाम के जिंदा में मर गए रोकर सकीना शाम के जिंदा में मर गए शाम के जिंदा में मर गए रोकर सकीना शाम के जिंदा में मर गए रोकर सकीना शाम के जिंदा में मर गए
مر گئے آلے نبی پہ ٹوٹی قیامت شام میں آلے نبی پہ ٹوٹی قیامت شام میں آلے نبی پہ ٹوٹی قیامت شام میں عباس کی چلی سکینہ گزر گئی عباس کی چلی تھی سکینہ گزر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی شملے لائن چھینے تھے گوہر کچھ اس طرح شملے لائن چھینے تھے گوہر کچھ اس طرح شملے لائن چھینے تھے گوہر کچھ اس طرح ننھی تمیز خون سے سکینہ کی بھر گئی ننھی تمیز خون میں سکینہ کی بھر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی بے ساختہ پکارا سر شاہ کربلا بے ساختہ پکارا سر شاہ کربلا بے ساختہ پکارا سر شاہ کربلا کرو تلاش سکینہ کدھر گئی زینب کرو تلاش سکینہ کدھر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی زندہ میں جب سکینہ نے پایا سر حسین زندہ میں جب سکینہ نے پایا سر حسین زندہ میں جب سکینہ نے پایا سر حسین منہ پر پدر کے منہ تو رکھا اور مر گئی منہ پر پدر کے منہ کو رکھا اور مر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی رو کر سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں مر گئی بانوں کے دل پہ گویا قیامت گزر گئے یا حسین
حضرات السلام علیکم. اس وقت آپ کے سامنے حاضری ہوئی ہے آستانہ زہرا کے اس پروگرام میں. تو سب سے پہلے میں شکریہ ادا کرنا چاہوں گا آستانہ زہرا کے تمام اراکین کا، تمام ممبرز کا، کہ انہوں نے مجھے شرف بخشا اور اپنے پروگرام میں مجھے حقیر کو بھی شریک کیا. اس وقت آپ کے روبرو آنے کا مقصد یہ ہے کہ ہندوستان سے ایک نوخان جن کی آنکھوں میں فقط روضہ حضرت سرکار سید الشہداء ہے اور ان کی آواز جو ابھی آپ سنیں گے وہ دلوں میں کرب پیدا کر دیتی ہے. ان کا بہترین انداز نوخانی کا ہے. تو اب ہم گزارش کرتے ہیں جناب شہباز علی صاحب سے، جن کو ابھی آپ سماعت فرمائیں گے اور میرے بات کی تائید کریں گے کہ یہ شخص یقیناً بہترین آواز کا مالک ہے. تو آئیے اب ہم گزارش کرتے ہیں نوخانی کے لیے محترم شہباز علی صاحب سے کہ وہ سامعین کے درمیان اپنا پردرد کلام پیش فرمائیں.
بابا سکینہ کا ہے نوحہ، سکینہ کا ہے نوحہ، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، 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 کہاں ڈھونڈوں میں بابا، کہاں ڈھونڈوں میں بابا، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، لہو بہتا ہے بابا جہاں کہیں پر، کہیں لاش پڑے ہیں خون میں تر، کہاں جائے سکینہ، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، 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 نہ تم آئے تو میں روؤں گی بابا، میں کس کے پاس پھر سوؤں گی بابا، گھر آ جاؤ خدا را، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، 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 ذرا دیکھو تو بابا جان آ کے، قیامت خیز ہے ہر ایک منظر، ہوا دشوار جینا، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، 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 تمہارے بن نہ جی پاؤں گی بابا، یہ لگتا ہے میں مر جاؤں گی بابا، بچا لو مجھ کو بابا، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، 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 مجھے شمر ستمگر نے ستایا، میری امداد کو کوئی نہ آیا، بہت میں نے پکارا، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، پاس میں آؤں تو کیسے، چچا کے پاس میں جاؤں تو کیسے، لینوں کا ہے پہرا میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو۔ ہاں بہت ویران یہ دشت بلا ہے، مجھے بابا بہت ڈر لگ رہا ہے، غضب کا ہے اندھیرا میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو۔ قیامت کی گھڑی یہ کیسی آئی، نہ تم ہو اور نہ امّو ہے نہ بھائی، کھڑی روتی ہوں تنہا میرے بابا کہاں ہو، 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 میرے بابا کہاں ہو۔ بہت ویران یہ دشت بلا ہے، مجھے بابا بہت ڈر لگ رہا ہے، غضب کا ہے اندھیرا میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو۔ صدا آئی نہ رو بالی سکینہ میرے پاس آ میری پیاری سکینہ، یہ کہہ کے نہ تڑپا میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو۔ عجب گوہر قیامت کا سما تھا، تڑپ کر رہ گیا غازی کا لاشا، پکاری جب سکینہ میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا کہاں ہو، میرے بابا ہے قاسم ہے قاسم ہے قاسم ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، سیور بلا رہا ہے جنگل میں تم کہاں ہو، آواز دے رہا ہے مقتل میں تم کہاں ہو، دے کر صدائیں تم کو شبیر تھک گیا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، نصرت کو تیری قاسم شبیر آنا پایا، پامال ہونے سے میں تم کو بچا نہ پایا، ٹاپوں سے جسم نازک چھلنی تیرا ہوا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، آنے میں بیٹا مجھ سے تاخیر ہو گئی ہے، شرمندہ تم سے روح شبیر ہو گئی ہے، نصرت کو وقت پر جو سرور نہ آ سکا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، کیسے اٹھائے سرور قاسم تمہاری میاں، تم دیکھ کے تمہارا خستہ ہوئی ہے ہمت، دشت بلا میں بیٹا بے بس تیرا چچا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، آؤ خلیل کعبہ یہ ماجرا تو دیکھو، ایوب صبر سرور کی انتہا تو دیکھو، قاسم کے تن کا ٹکڑا سرور اٹھا رہا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، اہل حرم سے کوئی کہہ دے جگر کو تھامے، فرت عالم سے یا رب فروا نہ جان دے دے، چادر میں لاش قاسم شبیر لا رہا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، ایک شب کی بیاہی دلہن پل میں ہوئی ہے بیوہ، سینے میں گھٹ رہے ہیں ارمان قلب کبرا، ناشاد ام لیلا کے لب پہ یہ بکا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، ماں قاسمہ کے نالے سیدانیوں میں گونجے، جس وقت دیکھے قاسم کے تن کے پارے پارے، اہل حرم کا خیمہ ماتم کدا بنا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، آئی ناراس ہائے قاسم تمہیں جوانی، تم ہی تھے بھیا شابر کی آخری نشانی، مصروف گریہ مقتل میں ابن فاطمہ ہے، حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے، قاسم بن حسن کی شہباز پر عطا ہو، اہل عزا کو یا رب دیدار کربلا ہو، کرب و بلا میں دانش کے لب پہ یہ دعا ہے، ابن حسن کا لاشا پامال ہو چکا ہے، فروا تمہارا قاسم ٹکڑوں میں بٹ گیا ہے۔
حسین 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 السلام علیکہ یا ابا عبداللہ، السلام علیکہ یا ابن رسول اللہ، السلام علیکہ یا ابن امیر المومنین و ابن سید الوسیین، السلام علیکہ یا ابن فاطمہ الزہرا یا سیدت نساء العالمین، السلام علی الحسین وعلی علی ابن الحسین وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ یا ابو الفضل العباس ابن امیر المومنین وقاسم ابن الحسن ومسلم ابن عقیل وحانی ابن عروہ وحبیب ابن مظاہر والحر الشہید ریاحی، السلام علیکم جمیعاً شہدائے کربلا و اسیران کربلا و رحمت اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ یا غریب الغرباء، السلام علیکہ یا معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکہ یا مغیث الشیعۃ والزوار فی یوم الجزاء، السلطان یا ابا الحسن یا علی ابن موسیٰ الرضا، روحی و جسمی لکل فدا و رحمت اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکہ یا مولا یا صاحب العصر والزمان، الامان الامان الامان، السلام علیکہ یا خلیفۃ الرحمن، السلام علیکہ یا شریک القرآن، السلام علیکہ یا مظہر الایمان، السلام علیکہ یا امام الانس والجان، عجل اللہ تعالی فرجک وسہل اللہ تعالی مخرجک وظہورک وجعلنا من آوانک و انصارک ورحمت اللہ وبرکاتہ صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل وبارك وجد ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وإيانا حافظا وقائدا وناصرا وسرينا وأعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها سويا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وجل وعلا.
Jazakallah, Jazakallah. Mu'mineen, this concludes our Majlis for this evening. We thank you very much for tuning into Astana's YouTube channel. Please join us tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. for our final Majlis of this series. Until then, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He keep you and your family safe and healthy. Good night and Shabba Khair.